everybody. If we could, please. We are recording as well. So just want to thank everybody for coming out here to this phenomenal event, bringing MechaCon to the DC area. Let's give a round of applause for that. All right. So I'm going to be moderating this panel. Haki Ami is my name. If I may, in the back over here, do I got to start pointing people out? Do I got to point people out? All right, we're going to get started here. I'm just going to project, and I'm sure that everyone will lower their voices in the process. We're going to have a conversation about the new black media. And we have a distinguished panel here. Some that I've met over time, and some I'm getting the honor and pleasure of meeting, and quite a distinguished panel. My name is Haki Ami, the Success Scholar. I've hosted several radio shows, author as well, and just been working originally from Baltimore now in this DC area. So I've done a lot of moderating panels over the past few weeks, months, and years in the DC area, Baltimore, New York, several other places. So this is a very interesting topic that we need to discuss and understand. So I'm going to read two of the gentlemen's bios just briefly here, so you all know the caliber and quality of the leaders that we actually have here. First to my far right, we have Mr. Samuel Forward III, and he is a columnist with Think Progress. Can somebody, thank you. Just lower, just low, please. Thank you. Just low. He's a columnist, Samuel Forward III. He's a columnist for Think Progress, who analyzes the influence of national politics and domestic policies on communities of color across the United States. Before joining Think Progress team, Forward was a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, where he founded and directed the Leadership Institute, the program to assist people of color advance their careers in public policy. Prior to Cat, Forward was a Metro columnist at the Plain Dealer in Cleveland, Ohio. The last stop in a nearly 3-decade journalism career that features posts at several metropolitan newspapers. During the 90s, he was a national correspondent in the Washington Bureau of the Los Angeles Times, where he created a national race relations beat and contributed to the paper's Pulitzer Prize-winning coverage of the LA riots of 1992. Forward is the author of 2 books, Walking from My Dream, My Life in the Black Middle Class, and full of it, words and fresh thinking from Fort Cleveland. So you can get those books from Mr. Forward. Let's give him a round of applause. And my brother, who we go back with on, 4 slacks in the Cadillac, what they say?
Something like that.
That was
way back.
But Jared Ball, first and foremost, he's a husband and a father. After that, he's a professor of media and African studies at Morgan, and produces multimedia at his site, I Mix What I Like. He's a full and tenured professor at Morgan State, don't you forget it. And he has several books out. We had some discussions before around the Malcolm X book that he authored some years ago. And he hosted radio programs both on WEAA as well as 89.3 FM, Pacifica, WTFW as well, Jazz and Justice Show. And I Mix What I Like. He used to have these mixtapes some years ago as well. So, and his new book, I Mix What I Like, a manifesto. I got a good copy of that.
It's not new.
Oh, right. I'm sorry.
It's good.
Yeah.
We're good. That's enough. I'm good. That's plenty about me.
Yes, sir.
We're good.
As well as the Brown liquor report. We have a crew of panelists as well. And I'll let each of them just say your name, just one sentence a little bit about yourself. I'll start with this gentleman first.
My name is Micah, go by the count. I'm host of the Brown Liquor Report with my dear friend and President Raspy Jazz Hands and my favorite DJ Black Shaw. We are a current events and pop culture podcast. We hold your hand through your timeline every week, and we speak with the authority that whiskey provides.
What we do. What he said. I'm Jazz Hands, or that's what I go by. It's Jasmine, you know, in the regular day-to-day. And we've been doing the Brown Liquor Report for about 2 years now. And we love it. We definitely love being a Black voice in a predominantly white space in terms of podcasts.
And I'm DJ Black Shaw. I am one of the co-hosts of the Brown Liquor Report. I'm also the sound engineer, I guess, of sorts. I you know, make sure that we sound good and sound very professional for our listeners, because it's, you know, I think it's very important for us not only have great content, but to also, you know, sound well and sound professional. So that is my job in the process.
All right, well, thank you for that introduction. So when we speak about Black media and new Black media, well, the conversation about what's new about it, that's a topic that perhaps needs to come up, and of course, but what is the old Black media? And Mr. Forward, who's our elder here, which is for wisdom, of course, and you've seen a lot in your 30-year journalism career. And once upon a time, there was just BET, you know, there was Ebony and Jen. That's what, you know, when people thought of newspapers and what you watching, it was like BET, what we reading in the newspapers. And so, what would you say in terms of, you know, the evolution? And,
Well, first off, you're going to show your age, you're going to show your youth. Black media goes back a lot longer than that.
Okay, yes, yes.
The Black media really started with Freedom's Journal.
Yes, sir.
Cornish and Western, who sort of put forth an argument shortly after slavery that for too long Black people were talked about and they never were able to speak in their own voice about things that concerned them.
Mm-hmm.
And so John Westworm and Samuel Cornish created Freedom's Journal as a way of speaking for themselves. And that was the first. That was Black media at its purest. And over the years in this country, there have been Black newspapers that really did give voice to the hopes and dreams of Black people. Probably most prominently, well before Ebony and Jet. Everybody knows about Ebony and Jet. Right. Everybody knows about BET. At least now they know about those. But we sort of had newspapers, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Amsterdam News, that talked about what was going on through Jim Crow and through Reconstruction and through most prominently the Civil Rights Movement. So that was a part of what I think of when I think of Black media. We'll talk a little bit more in a bit about where we are now, but that really is the sort of the foundation that sort of put forth the idea from Westworm and Cornish that Black people talking about Black people in a voice and in a way that they understood.
Great. That's a great opening. Chicago Defender, right here in this area, we have the Baltimore Afro and the DC Afro. They just had a 125-year anniversary that, you know, we had the opportunity to attend. You know, just attempting to stay connected to our history. So I learned a lot from actually just listening, going to that particular event. So, Brother Jared, so what has been your revolutionary path in terms of striving to create these independent spaces, you know, with all that you've seen and fought for?
Well, I mean, you know, one of the things that I think continues to confuse the issue when people bring up the phrase Black media is the long, you know, standing struggle between what is Black owned and what is Black targeting, and the politics surrounding all of that. So a lot of times we still get wildly confused when we see something that says this is Black, or Black media, or Black press, or a Black movie. simply because we see black faces in it or even black people in some form of leadership or control. But the reality is that most of what is produced under the rubric of black media is media owned by white elite corporate entities that is targeted towards black audiences, or even more nuanced, white-owned media product that are nominally black that are targeted at white audiences who want to see some degree of blackness in their media. That's Tyler Perry, for instance. Like, that's his space. And even the former executive, one of the executive producers at Lionsgate Films, in a quote in the New York Times that I still think is, one of those where they accidentally reveal what is going on. She said about why Lionsgate supported Tyler Perry's career. She said because we needed media that would fill the niche market, as she called it, of white audiences that want to see black product. So what kind of black product do they want to see? Well, they want to see Tyler Perry. So that's why his films continuously get made and promoted. And then a lot of black people who misunderstand the situation and say, well, there's Tyler Perry, that's black. Let's support it. Let's not hate on it. And miss the point that, yes, it has some nominally placed black people with some nominally placed power, but that's not who's actually in control or who's the target or what the purpose is there for. So then similarly, even in other areas where you have a white advertising community that often dominates content, it doesn't even matter if you have a black woman like a Kathy Hughes who owns black media, because her advertising base is white, corporate, and commercial. So to satisfy them and to keep her stations running and to keep her lights on, she has to produce a content that appeases those audiences more than what I would consider to be the radical political sensibilities of black community that needs a media to inform and inspire different forms of behavior, politics, and movement. So in the limited amount of work that I've tried to be involved in, and I always like to tell the story that when I came back from the military, the job I started working in was delivering pizzas. And it's very clear when you're in the car all day that if you turn on the radio, you're either going to get the same 5 corporate commercially selected hip hop tracks, and then the equivalent of that in terms of news. So at that time, I just went to the lecture tape community at Everyone's Place in Baltimore. I still think the best bookstore ever created, that had this huge library of lecture tapes on audio cassette and CD. And I would get those, and then I would get my mixtapes from DJs producing mixes of hip hop and funk and whatever else that you couldn't get on the radio. And then my whole day would be just going back and forth between that. So when I got to be the point where I was trying to be a media producer, I said I want to take those 2 traditions, the radical traditions of the origins of the mixtape, which is hip hop's original mass medium, blend that with the radical traditions of the street oration and the unsanctioned kind of African world communication, put those together and distribute a freely, meant to be an emancipatory journalistic media project that would encourage, most importantly, radical political organization to match the radical dreams that we have that we want to put into our media. And that's always the component I feel is lacking in a lot of these discussions. And one of the pieces that I wanted to contribute to and still try to contribute to is that we can't just be beautiful and intelligent and well produced. There has to be a political component that matches that says we also want political power, which is how you end up getting the redistributive politics that you need to take care of all the problems that continue to face all of our communities. So that's about it.
So and these ladies, brothers and sisters, I went to and listened to them have a discussion about Ayanna Van Zandt. And so, I mean,
among other things.
Yeah, among other things. We're going to flow with that. But because, and I've known of her over the years, and I don't want to personalize this, but it's like, the sensationalization of media just for race.
Excuse me, y'all. I know we are doing all our good stuff real quick, but just you don't have to stop talking. Just keep it down just a little bit.
Thank you very much.
So continue doing what y'all doing though. Just a little bit lower. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just want these ladies and gentlemen to expand. Not just to talk about that, but in terms of creating this independent voice, if you will. In terms of your podcast and what have you seen in terms of media and your perceptions of media?
To piggyback off what the brother said about the audience versus the producer, you see that now, especially in the podcast space. There are over 400,000 podcasts, and the majority of them, 2/3 of them have a white male as the head of the podcast. So when you see, even in corporate podcasts that say cater to a minority, say NPR, Code Switch, which is talking about people of color, but that is talking about people of color to white people. So they have things like explanatory comments. They had an episode where they mentioned Tupac, and they got all these letters about, well, who's this Tupac person? So they had the whole episode of the next episode of their podcast was explaining who Tupac was. That isn't for us. That's for them. Our podcast is for us. We have very few explanatory comments. We're talking to our audience because we want to keep that tradition of black media being kind of that beacon, that lighthouse in the storm, that safe space where you can go to. That even if, we say we hold your hand through your timeline. So you may scroll through your timeline and see this is crazy, and we're there to say, yes, it is crazy. You're not imagining it. This is crazy. These folks are trying to kill you, and they're trying to harm you, and they're trying to hurt your spirit and your mind. We're here to walk you through it. Because sometimes you just need a friend to hold your hand and say it's gonna be okay. But we're talking to us. We're talking to, and not just the academics amongst us, we're talking to the proletariat. We're talking to regular folks. We're talking to your Antoine Dodson, your Bella Noche, your folks that know all the business, that know all the business in the neighborhood. We're talking to them because those are the griots, those are the keepers of the culture that can preserve the culture for the future. So that's what we see, that's what we do in the independent podcast.
I mean,
So is that the equivalent of white splaining then? Like, is that mansplaining? Like white splain? Is that a phrase? I think that should be a phrase though, because what you're talking about is a real serious phenomenon. Like if there isn't a white splaining phrase, we should coin it.
Well, let me offer something, sort of combining both of those together. Brother, what's your name again? Tell me again. Jerry. You raise a really good point that I think a lot of people don't really appreciate when you talk about media, and that is basically people think of media as something that is free or a commodity like water or electricity, and the cost associated with producing it is kind of invisible. So now we're in this really huge transition period. So the point you were making about really what you were arguing about, or making an argument in favor of sort of getting away from the capitalist notion of our media, because ultimately whoever produces it, whoever pays the bill, is going to be able to control what is being said on the other end of it. And for black people, if you believe that the media, the news or the information or the entertainment that you consume, like watching television, ought to be free, you're going to have a problem with being able to get what you want from that. So people really have to be willing to invest some of themselves and some of their own treasure to be able to find the information that affirms them. So I never thought of the idea of sort of creating your own media while you're in your car. I mean, people have always done that. You do the CDs or the burn your own CDs, or your own, in my case, old enough to the cassette disc that you put in your car. But that's really a form of sort of creating the kind of information, the kind of entertainment that you want, that is tailored to your own taste. But it takes your resources to be able to make that happen. You're not going to be able to get, Procter & Gamble to be able to produce the kind of information that you want.
That's correct.
That's a really good point. We were just talking about that as we're preparing for a conference that we're going to host at the end of next month. And we were talking about how do things change when you want to, this whole podcasting, eventually people want to, get to the point that they're either on some kind of network where they have a larger distribution or they have sponsors. They want to have sponsors to kind of help, with the cost of producing content. And it kind of gets to the point where it's like, okay, how do you grow without sacrificing control of your narrative or the integrity of your narrative? So it's something to really think about. I hope it's something that we can maintain as much as possible, and it's one of the reasons why we do it all on our own. You know, we don't have any sponsors. We, you know, record at my house, which we used to call the trap. You know, record at my kitchen, and I cook some food, and he brings his equipment, and we put out there and we talk about things that we want to talk about that we think are interesting to people that look and sound like us. Because, you know, we just feel like it's important to control our stories and what we see and how that information is being consumed. Because sometimes it just doesn't feel like the people that you see on the television that look like you are speaking to you, you know, or speaking for you.
Well, there's been much discussion. Mr. Forward, or Professor Ball, I know folks you have dealt with this net neutrality conversation. How, in your estimation and your experience, has that affected the Black community? If you
The whole idea of net neutrality, first off, I think, is not very well understood.
Yeah, right.
And so I think a great number of people in all communities don't know what net neutrality really comes down to. Simply put, net neutrality means that the cable companies or the providers, they basically have an infrastructure that they feed information to someone else who creates that information. If you have the pipeline and you're able to constrain what goes through that pipeline, then you can advantage some people or you can disadvantage other producers of information or entertainment or music, whatever it might be. If you're the person that controls the pipeline, then you get to play fast and loose with the information. What the government has said was that no one should be able to control that pipeline, that all information will be able to flow through and the consumer then will be able to make choices. What does this really mean in a practical sense? If you are Time Warner, for example, and you have an agreement with Sony Pictures, and I'm making this up, to be able to have that on your cable outlet, you may allow it to go through, but if someone from another picture company, MGM for example, you may slow theirs down from going through. And the government said, no, you can't slow it down. It has to be open, it has to be neutral to everybody. And now the government is saying, well, there's more money to be made if these guys who control the pipeline are able to regulate them. What that ultimately will mean will be that the consumer, black folk, whoever wants to get information or news, is going to be constrained by market forces as to what they will get. Again, it's another form of capitalism determining what kind of information an individual will get. And I think that we really do have to spend a great bit of time educating ourselves about how these things work, and then to be able to sort of advocate on our behalf, whether it works to our advantage or not.
I mean, I would only want to add very quickly that the issue around net neutrality is important because one, aside from what's already been said, is that it's a reminder of the politics of communication and the very purpose of the internet in the first place. I mean, we have to remember the internet is military technology. It was not developed to level the playing field and make everybody equal and to deliver everyone's communication and ideas equally. To the extent that we're able to do that, that's just a byproduct of a piece of technology that's being used to surveil everybody, to launch rockets and missiles and do a whole bunch of other stuff. And we get the gadget, and we play with the toy, and we do our little work and all of that and have our little fun, but the reality is we're playing with something that has a military component, and as the people who are in control say, they use it for full spectrum dominance. That is, the idea is that they militarily control the internet the same way they control the land, sea, and air with the military. They can control cyberspace the same way they want to control it. So the issue of net neutrality is about not only affecting the consumer, but affecting those of us who produce content, and to say that the content on my website will not move as quickly as the content of someone who can afford that fast lane and that has all this big commercial money behind it. So that's just yet another way of marginalizing content that people in power don't want widely disseminated. And this is why we're seeing this slow, I mean, your point about the white maleness of podcasts is really important, because it's not that many years ago that they said the same thing about YouTube, that 90% of all funded YouTube operations were white and male. So even as people run off to YouTube and it's yay, and everybody's running off and yay, it still seems to be coincidentally white men who end up at the top with all the funding. And then not just people of color, so-called, but people with what I would consider radical progressive ideas get more and more pushed to the hinterlands of the internet with this worsening perception that things are getting more equal and more level. And that's where I think there's a real concern where if we look at, and I'll stop here, that we have to always remember, as the rise of the internet occurred, a devolution of the material condition of African people in this country and around the world has occurred. So there has not been this, yay, the internet, and then yay, we're all doing better. It's been, yay, the internet, and look at the world getting more and more unequal to the point where they just reported that 1% of the world population has more wealth than all the rest of us combined.
So in terms of, I was looking at like something like the top 50 news sites, and it made me think about like Black Planet, which wasn't like, that wasn't black owned, right? That was a Chinese person. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, but in terms of the viability, because I thought when people were doing things online, I know I started back with Harambe Radio, and I was just, we gonna be it, and sometimes, these sites kind of like begin to fall off. So in terms of your, how you organize and market your podcasts, what are some of the strategies that you've been in 2 years now?
2 years.
Yeah, and you bring a combination of experience individually. So what are some of your strategies to get your message out to different audiences?
The irony of the net neutrality conversation is that we have to use, we're produced online content.
Right.
So the only way you can advertise is through online media. So if they're starting to, if they want to marginalize everything, then that's going to cut off the way we advertise. It's going to cut off the way we talk. I mean, we put things on Facebook, on Twitter, all the social. But if they're going to start fast lanes and cutting those off so that it's not taking away, that's going to hurt us. If you look at the top 20 podcasts from January, 12 of them are all produced by one NPR. The rest are produced by by New York Public Radio, by Chicago Public Radio. Those aren't podcasts. Those are their news programs that they record, and you can download it on your phone. That's not me and your friends getting a microphone and making an independent thing. That's you going into the studio as a professional journalist, recording a program and downloading it to your phone. Now, there are different levels to this thing. You have things like Serial, which are well produced and they're very slick. And then you have stuff where it's just a guy on his iPhone. But the real slick, well-produced guy, those are the top 20 downloaded podcasts. Who in here has heard of The Reap, Kid Fury and Crystal? Of course, they don't make the top 20. No, they don't. They're on a network. They're on Combat Jack Network. They don't make the top 20 downloads. They average 1.2 million downloads a month. To be in the bottom, it's over 20 million downloads. So,
wait, I'm sorry, say that number? Say that again. To be in the bottom?
The bottom of the top 20. Invisibilia is like 20 million a month.
And that's the bottom of the top 20.
That's the bottom.
It's so almost like a double dip.
And like, we're talking like, we love to read and all these great things, and that's talking to us. But when you're talking about nationally, that 400,000, they're doing 20, 30 downloads a week, 20, 30 million a week. Like it's nothing. So imagine if you're a small independent podcast, or you're a small independent newspaper, or mixtape show, and you don't have those resources. You don't have NPR resources. You don't have National Public Radio resources, New York, Chicago, all those. you don't have a network behind you like Penelope or Gimlet or Crooked Media or people who are connected to the Obama administration so they can get you access to stuff, you may get lost in the sauce.
So you do a lot of cross promoting.
You mentioned, oh, you want to say something?
No, I was saying, we all have, you know, in addition to doing our podcast, we all have our individual projects.
Okay.
So, you know, like I DJ,
Right,
Michael
right.
writes, she's a social worker, she's just amazing. I'll let her talk about her stuff later. she, you know, we all do our separate things, and we, you know, while we're doing those separate things, we promote our podcast.
Right.
So, you know, if he's in South by Southwest writing, you know, doing write-ups and different, you know, performances or things like that, he's promoting the podcast. And if I'm DJing, if I'm doing a wedding, I also mention that, hey, I do this. Or I'm at, you know, in a bar or something, I do this. Yeah, very grassroots. So, you know, and it's worked. It's worked. You know, I mean, again, we're not doing 30 million downloads a month, not even close to it. But you know, just using that strategy has definitely helped us grow, and it has you know, broaden our audience, and you know, who knows? We kind of started this. You know, I mean, I said, you know, my vision was like, you know, we coming for Oprah and them. You know, when we got together, we coming for Oprah and them. But at the very least, it was an outlet for us because there was so much going on. You know, late 2015, so much going on in the world. You know, we were just getting those, you know, little buzzes about, you know, certain person running for president and all this. So there was a lot going on. You know, Black Lives Matter, a lot going on. So we needed an outlet. And that's why we got together, and we actually have people that like what we're doing. So we're keeping at it. You know, a lot of podcasts don't make it 2 years. We're about to record our 100th episode, and you know, they just you know, fizzle out. Life happens. You know, we all got kids. You know, stuff happens. But
9 to 5 sunken places.
that's two careers. So, but yeah, people like us, so we're just gonna keep at it, and you know, maybe come for own one day.
So
literally own it.
So
Own it. You know?
marketing mix, you know, like marketing in different areas as well as segmented marketing. I did learn something as a business major, so did pay attention a little bit, but and having your target audience, you know, knowing who you're looking at, where they live, what they need, and all of that.
Sure.
But you mentioned something. One of you mentioned something about the role of politics. And Mr. Pullwood, I know Brother Ball, Professor Ball, has done some good grassroots political work and analysis. So your work in terms of make progress, and I've read, I think it said something about your work with politics as well. So what have you seen on a, shall I say, a macro level in terms of some of these different
Yeah, that's a really good question. I used to work in the mainstream, the 30 years working for newspapers, you know, the city newspapers, Baltimore and LA and other places. Now, very, very few people read those newspapers anymore. Circulation has just gone away, the advertising has gone away. And most people get their information, first and foremost, they get it by word of mouth. That is the most powerful way that's as old as humanity.
Right.
But technology has sort of come into it. And that's where this conference, this reason I'm here, was the merging of technology and an African sensibility is changing. I work for an institute, a think tank, which doesn't, if we're going to be honest, doesn't really put people of color at the forefront of their interests. For me, it's interesting to be there, to be in this particular space, because I'm learning about the technology at a moment of transition in terms of our media environment. And our work is all online. And it's almost like a blog, but it's online, thinkprogress.org. It has assembled a group of reporters and editors and videographers, photographers that would rival any of the newspapers that I used to work for, although they operate on a much, much smaller scale and with far less money. And I think that's kind of where what we understand media and in particular politics is going. Because what we're attempting to do, you mentioned about audience, all of that. Our audience isn't everyday people. We are expressly interested in trying to influence the influential, to be able to get them to do what we think they ought to do. They're not very at all interested or even cognizant of the grassroots. They figure that if they can persuade, the money people or the political people to do what they are interested in, that is progressive politics, that will trickle down in a sense and have influence over how voters behave. And it's a theory. For me, it's very fascinating to watch how that plays out in terms of I'll give you an example. What we know of as the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare actually was created where I work. Almost sort of like you would think mad scientists in the laboratory figuring out how could we get health care for people. And a lot of smart academics and government people came together and came up with this idea, which they presented to all of the Democratic candidates, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, when they were running. Obama seized on it faster than Hillary Clinton did, and it became a cornerstone of his campaign, which was probably one of the policy ideas that helped him get the nomination. So that once he got in office, he then needed people. Almost all politicians know nothing about policy. They hire people to tell them how to do policy. And we're one of those groups that they hire, so to speak, to tell them how to do it. So the Obama team came to where I work, the Center for American Progress, and developed, fleshed out the ideas that our mad scientists had created for how to do Obamacare. What was really shocking and interesting to me to see through this whole process was there were almost no people of color involved in the policy part of doing that. That was going to affect enormous numbers of black people in America, but there were none in terms of developing what became Obamacare. The conservatives hated it, and they made it seem as though this was something as a giveaway for black people. And there was nobody that could argue back against that because you couldn't go into black communities because people didn't know what it was. And that was one of the reasons that it had such a hard time getting started. And so I think that when we understand how the media works with public policy, we can get a better understanding of how we can have a role in shaping some of the things that come, some of the outputs. There's very few inputs going in, and so we have to be players on that part of it, as well as be able to understand what's coming out of it.
Want to add to that, brother?
No, okay.
Oh, sure, brother, want to add to that?
Question, you've been in traditional media and in more non-traditional media.
Right.
What do you think the biggest barrier is in traditional media for getting those voices of color?
Money. Money. I mean, I think that it's the same whether it's traditional or whether it's now. You mentioned, I don't want to start a fight about this, but I think that if you ever get to the point where you grow your product and someone comes to you and says, hey, we like this so much, we're going to give you $50 million to do this. It won't be your product anymore.
No, no, absolutely not.
Now, the question is, do you want to do your product or do you want the $50 million? And, that's your choice, and it's not one that anybody else can make.
Somebody asked me what was my sellout number.
That's a good number.
What is
That's a good number. That's a good number.
That would change your life that you would sell out for?
Yeah, I mean, basically that's
A lot of people sell out for a lot less.
Yeah.
But I just want to add. Oh, I'm sorry. We'll go to you.
No, what he was saying is, I understand what he's saying. But and I'm sorry.
No, we were going to go to the audience.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm from Miami.
Okay.
I have a TV show down there.
Okay.
And I just wanted to see what the landscape is here in the DC area, because we're thinking about doing it in other places. It's called the casting. And what he was saying about I know.
Weird title.
It gets
A weird title.
you got to put the H-E.
Yeah, I got you.
But But what he was saying about what's your number, and sometimes you always have to say, hey, you know what? Maybe I can sell this because I can reproduce something somewhere else. And just like the three of you were saying that we're doing other things outside of it, I think it's good that you know, still think about stuff that you can do along with your podcast. I mean, for me personally, I've been doing my show for about 6 years now, and I'm a police officer. So when I would do my voiceovers and all the rest of that stuff, I'd be my patrol car. You know, hey, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
But from that, you know, voiceover work started happening, all kind of other things started happening when I just put it out. You know, I dumped about 107 million into my, just you know, I mean, not 107, 170,000. I want 107.
About to say, like, you got some other price. You got it like that.
But
I'm like that.
you know, the first thing somebody told me right now, I was talking to Myron Howard, he said, you got to just do it. You know, you just got to do it. No matter what it is, if it's a dream that you have to put it out there first. You know, then you can start tweaking it and all the rest of it. I'm listening to what's going on. I'm just trying to get the landscape down. So if I want to do something, I want to know, you know, what's going on here, because Miami is a whole different beast. And DC, it's a little more conscious here. And it's a little more frivolous down where I am. You know, they got the housewives and all the rest of that stuff. But I like what I do.
And I think this is why, you know, I wanted to add the political discussion. I mean, we're in DC, you know, I mean, people look for individuals that's from this area, whether we know it or not, to be politically astute on some levels. I mean, you know, we have...
That's a mistake.
Okay. I mean, yeah. Well, why would you say that, sir?
I mean, what we have in Washington is a lot of politics. It's not necessarily smart politics. And I think people confuse quantity with quality often. I mean, it's just, everybody talks politics here, but not very many people really understand what they're looking at and when it happens. And I mean, people are confused about what they see in all of the politics, but they're talking about it all the time. So that's why I would say that.
I'll piggyback just by quoting a line from the great documentary that everybody should watch, even though I don't particularly appreciate the platform, but Wormwood on Netflix is incredibly important. And as they said at the gathering not far up the road in Western Maryland, they had that toast, and they said, I think it's apropos to where we are now, to say confusion to the enemy. And that's the point. So much of what comes out of here in the guise of politics is just intended, I think, purposeful. It's not even what I think, it's said, it's expressed as such, as propaganda, to potentially confuse as many people as possible. So that's why I think people shouldn't just assume, well, DC is student politics. No, it's the land of confusion.
We'll go to this gentleman. I don't know how much, we'll do a time check, and we'll go to this gentleman.
I was thinking what you said, politics, that's a good question. I think in the scholarship realm, when this work on what's happening goes on, I think they're going to look at the work that Sam did when he interviewed me, John, and Naima on that piece that you did for the center. Because, you know, I had my network look at you before I agreed to do the interview. And they were saying, okay, Center for, I said, okay, those people are reasonably intelligent. And they would understand, they would really want to know what's going to happen. Because the piece that was done like by Ruth LaFurla of the New York Times was hot garbage. You know, that was, you can show when you're talking about Afrofuturism, because a lot of people don't know what they're talking about. And I even, Mai was telling me, the thing with black podcasters, with them, I noticed the independent black, they don't want to interview certain people who know what they're talking about. Because it forces them to have to go read. Okay? And we're more interested in a sound bite. So they just want to say, oh, Afrofuturism, that's comic books and a cartoon or whatever. And that's why they won't call certain people. They'll call a friend who might, I remember, like, I heard somebody who went, they were citing off of Wikipedia or something, or whatever. And that's why I see with the indie podcast sometimes, they don't do enough of the homework. and the people who have the resources, some of the people, so you're torn between this thing and you want to get the product out there, and then you've got to sift through certain things to allow it to happen. Like something that I had unanticipated was when I did a talk, it was a couple weeks ago in LA, a lady that does a reality TV show with the kind of things we talk about here wants to put in a reality show. And so I'm just here thinking about this stuff because it's out there now where people are trying to come up with the next new thing in the form of a product based upon an idea. And that's why when I had an exchange with Jared, it's important for us to put our ideas in writing because the people who are going to do the research and all that stuff are still going to come back to where the idea came from. And that's where, so we're at the same time, this thing's happening so fast. The ink is barely dry, the ideas out there, and hyper-capitalism and trying to figure out how do we do product or policy, which even there's an aspect of it that ties into criminal justice that's in this very seminal general stages of, that's kind of what's going on right now. And I think the podcasts that are going to thrive are going to be the ones who are honest to that grassroots element of politics that doesn't really care about what Obama, the Democrats, or Republicans are talking about. That people are looking for something new that seems to be loyal to a certain type of vision, and they'll put their money in. And I mean, you can still have your air of independence about that. So.
But I think also you have to remember too that there's so many different types of podcasts out there. We're not a monolith, especially independent podcasts. And I definitely think there is a conversation going on between podcasters and traditional media. It's not a show or episode that we do where we're not doing adequate research because we're all professionals and degreed in our own right. So we have context for things that we talk about, whether through lived-in experiences or our career experiences or our volunteer and grassroots experiences. And often we'll refer, we'll often give our audience actionable items like go read such and such.
And it goes the other way too.
Yeah,
The mainstream
like kind of
pays attention to what you're doing.
like a volleying back and forth. So, I think it's different ways to, the things that we're trying to topple, these types of structures, these white supremacist structures, these ones that want to, confuse us with different types of propaganda, control the type of information we're able to receive. That devil's big enough, we can all take a whack and not hit it in the same place. So the different approaches that we take to it, whether through traditional written media or independent podcasting, whether through, us doing an entertainment and almost comedic approach, but still slipping in some really good information, that's digestible for you, I think is a wonderful thing. And so for us to thrive, or just to be able to have something that's sustainable, I guess that's kind of almost a subjective definition. I'll keep going until the wheels fall off, or until my bank account dries up, or until net neutrality makes internet unaffordable for me. Right, or I get the 50 million. Or I get the 50 million. I think you'll find a lot of people, there are a lot of podcasts out there, independent and otherwise, that are holding on and maintaining what they believe to be their truth and a truth that other people need to hear. And they don't care if they don't get 1 million downloads. We're clocking probably like 1,000 a month, or maybe a little bit, 1,500, 2,000, 5,000 downloads a month. And that's so small in the grand scheme of things. But, that number to me almost seemed like unfathomable when we first started, but I was still okay to do it.
So I just want the one thing, and I'm not an optimist, but one thing I just want to say that I've always, because my numbers are really low too, like and especially when you hear this 20 million at the bottom, it's just painful. But I always remember this that years ago, Robert and Mabel Williams, who legends of the Black Power, they wrote about how when they met with one of the assistants to Ho Chi Minh, who told them that the Tet Offensive was inspired by the little pamphlets that Robert and Mabel Williams would, and I can't remember the name of the pamphlet,
Robert who?
Robert Williams.
Robert F. Williams?
Yeah.
Okay.
Robert and Meg Williams. The pamphlet of it, because they were doing the broadcast from Radio Free Dixie from
Yeah, that's
Cuba.
Robert F. Williams.
Right, but then they also had a written pamphlet, and I can't remember what it was, but it had made its way all the way over there.
Right.
And I know they weren't getting 2,000 readers a month.
Right.
And it made it all the way over there to some little man in the jungle who said, who had that inspired, already inspired movement that turned the tide of the Vietnam War. The Tet Offensive is where they said, turn the tide of the Vietnam War. And all inspired by a little pamphlet by a black radical on exile in Cuba. So exactly. So it may not lead to the $50 billion in dollars, but in terms of reach and influence, you may. So I try to remember that when I see those numbers.
You never know, and you never know who's listening.
That's what I'm saying.
I've had people
Exactly.
stop me on the street. Hey, you DJ Black Shop?
Yep.
Well, report. Like, who are you? It's not just our friends. At first, it was just our friends.
But now it's a bigger
Now we just
impact.
said, yeah.
All right, so we want to thank everybody, but before we close out, because I believe that this was just an hour, we are there. But I want you all first and we'll get down, to say some closing words. We have a conference coming up. So can you speak about what's going to happen, what's happening in that conference?
The conference is We the Culture Podcast Collective, which is the Brown Liquor Report, Faith Uncut, the Innovator Studio.
Show them the shirt.
Innovator Studio DC. We're hosting our first podcast conference April 27th and 28th called The Age of the Digital Griot. It's all about podcasters and folks who want to be podcasters that are black and brown folks and usually more marginalized voices in this podcast industry. So come out, we'll talk about podcasting for social change. We'll talk about financing your podcast and producing quality sound, producing distinct content, and definitely celebrating, podcasting as a form of maintaining our oral tradition. So hope you guys will come.
2-day event.
So where's it going to be?
It's going to be at 1111 Vermont Avenue, 1110 Vermont Avenue, Northwest Washington, D.C. That's Open Gov Hub. Yeah, so.
And we're on Eventbrite.
Yeah, you can find us on Eventbrite.
We're gonna do some streaming.
We're gonna record some and stream some.
So it's gonna be 2 days. The first day is like a mixer.
You gotta come in. You gotta come.
Mixer and a panel. The second day are gonna be more workshops
Yeah.
and things like that. So from like 10 to 6.
That's great.
So it's gonna be great. It's a lot of work.
Right. Definitely. Yeah. So, first of all,
I'm good.
Anything else coming up?
I mixwhatIlike.org and I mix what I like. Shout out to Steve Pico, which is where that name comes from. I write what I like. So anyway, that's all. That's all. Thank you very much.
All right.
And we're at the Brown Liquor Report. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook, Twitter, all that. Look us up on all those. We're there. All the socials. All the socials.
All the socials. All right.
Our show is on SoundCloud. Our show is on SoundCloud. We're also on iTunes.
And
We're also on
iTunes.
iTunes. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. All right. Anything coming up?
Nope.
All right.
I mix what I